As I mentioned at the top of the service, we are so excited to have John Pavlovitz give our message this morning. For so many of us, John has been a voice of hope for us these past few years, where so many of us have been living in despair and discouragement and anger at the state of our nation. Reading John's words each week have inspired so many of us, have strengthened so many of us, have given us courage to speak our truth. If you're like me, when you read John's words, you say, he has expressed exactly what I'm feeling. He puts it down so beautifully and expresses it in a way that all of us want to share it with our family members and friends, to say, this is how I am feeling. And so we're so grateful that John has been using his voice and his gifts and his God-given talents to be that voice that we need in this time in our nation. John is a Christian pastor from North Carolina. He has been in church ministry for over 20 years, but in the past few years, most people have come to know John through his blog, which is called Stuff That Needs to Be Said. Millions of people read it every day all around the world. John wrote a wonderful book last year called A Bigger Table, which I know many of our Douglas UCC family members have read, and we're excited to announce that John has a new book coming out next month, which is called Hope and Other Superpowers. Isn't that a cool title? We're so grateful that John is here today to give us a message of encouragement and hope. So would you please give a nice, warm Douglas UCC welcome to John Pavlovitz. Thank you.
Well, good morning. I'm going to hope that you can hear me without grabbing this microphone by my hand, because I'm Italian. And if I don't move my hands, you're not going to be able to understand the thing I'm saying. It is a joy to be with you today. I'm fortunate doing the work that I do. I get to travel all around the country, speaking to communities about faith and love and justice and peace and kindness and diversity. And part of that, I travel a lot by plane, which for many of you would be exciting, but for me it isn't. I'm not that great a flyer. I tend to be on an airplane and then realize that I'm in a large metal tube hurling through space, and I become uneasy, you know. But I was flying to Albuquerque, New Mexico earlier in the year, and I was having a pretty good flight for someone who's sure he's going to die on an airplane. You know, I was nestled there in my little elementary school-sized chair. I had my Dixie cup full of soda. I had my Barbie doll-sized bag of pretzels. And I was listening to some music, and I was enjoying my time. It was rare, and I was interrupted by a voice, and it was the voice of the pilot. And I realized this because he said, folks, it's the pilot. And he said, I'm going to ask the flight attendants to stop service. I'm going to ask you to put on your seatbelts because we're about to hit a little chop. That's the word he used. And I knew that word. I recognized that word because I knew that word was bad news for me. And he went on to talk about a bad weather system that we were approaching. And he said it again. He said, we're about to hit a little chop. It's going to get choppy. And I knew that choppy was pilot speak for we are about to be shaken like a snow globe in the hands of an angry toddler, right? I knew choppy meant I'm about to contemplate my mortality while wedged between two strangers, right? I knew that choppy meant that I was about to make a lot of promises to God about what I'll do if we land safely, none of which I intend to keep, right? But the pilot was very matter-of-factly telling us in his way, hang on, turbulence is coming. And if you're a Christian, you probably understand those sentiments because in the Gospel of John, Jesus is talking to his disciples, to those who he loves, and he's talking because he's going to leave them. And he said, I want to tell you all these things. I want to encourage you because in this world, you're going to have trouble, but take heart, I've overcome the world. Jesus is saying to those who would follow him in the ways of mercy and compassion and love and justice, hang on, turbulence is coming. So I suppose I've come here from Raleigh, North Carolina to give you a message, friends. Hang on. Turbulence is coming. Actually, I'm a little late, aren't I? Yeah, turbulence took the early flight out here, right? This is a time of great shaking in our nation, right? It's a time of incredible turbulence. And so many people who have experienced lifetimes of shaking are feeling it even more. Muslim Americans are experiencing great turbulence right now. Migrant families are experiencing turbulence. Parents of critically ill children are experiencing turbulence. Survivors of sexual assault are experiencing turbulence. Lovers of the environment are experiencing turbulence. Young men of color are experiencing turbulence. LGBTQ families are experiencing turbulence. And people who have deep compassion for the oppressed and the marginalized and the hurting, we too are experiencing great turbulence today. And if there's one thing I see as I travel the country right now, I see depletion in people. I see how tired you are. Because it's exhausting to give a damn, isn't it? To wake up every day and to try and be a person of compassion in a time when compassion is in such great demand, it can wear you out, right? To wake up every day and push back against predatory politicians and toxic systems and corrupt legislation and acts of treason and tweet tantrums, and all these things can begin to pile upon you, right? They're on your shoulders, and they're in your clenched jaw, and they're in your elevated heart rate, and they're in the knot in your stomach that returns every morning when you check your Twitter, or you watch the news, or you step out into your community, or you walk into your living room and you see how much compassion is required of you. And this causes you to be exhausted. And I'm not sure why you're here in this place, but I have a feeling you're here because you're one of the damn givers. Because you're a deep lover of humanity, because justice matters to you, because equality and diversity are hills that you live and will die on. Whether you're an activist or a minister or a caregiver or a parent or simply a responsible citizen of the planet, you feel the heaviness of these days. Most of us, at any moment in our lives, we are experiencing turbulence. We are going through the storms that come when we are human beings living on the planet. And we are all facing fear, because fear and turbulence come as a package deal, don't they? The storms come and they create anxiety. And if we live on this planet and we walk into our true identities, and as we live our convictions, and as we walk into our faith, as we speak our truth, we are going to experience turbulence in the form of opposition and conflict, things that bring us anxiety, things that bring us grief, things that cause us, if we allow it, to give us fear. Because, see, we have a choice in our moments of turbulence. We can choose peace, or we can choose fear. And the problem is, fear is very persuasive, isn't it? Fear knows the buttons to push in us. It knows exactly our weaknesses. It knows the deep recesses of our hearts. This is true. This storm effect happens in our home in practical ways. Like when actual storms come in our home, I have two people that I live with, or two beings that I live with, and they have different reactions to the storms. So I have an 8-year-old daughter, and when she was 6, her name is Selah. When storms would come, the thunder would ring out, and the lightning would flash, and she would get filled with anxiety. She would cry. She would hyperventilate. She'd run around the house. She'd become frantic. Our dog, however, would have a different reaction to the storm. When I would not find the dog. I would be looking for the dog. The dog would have disappeared. I would find the dog in the bathtub. And I'd say, storm's coming. She's like a little furry meteorologist, you know. So it was funny because these two reactions, my daughter was unable to rest and my dog was unable to move, right? And when fear comes to us, these are the reactions that we have. We either become unable to move, frozen, paralyzed, stuck, or we become unable to rest. Our hearts never stopping from racing, our pulse rate always high. And I wonder about the things that cause you fear today. I wonder what your reaction is. Are you unable to move? Are you unable to rest? Because neither of those things is anything God desires for you. God does not want you paralyzed with fear and overwhelmed and frantic. God desires something else for you today. And see, turbulence comes and fear is waiting in it. And the gut-wrenching thing about fear that I've found as I've gotten older is that you don't abandon fear as you get older. You just trade it in for age-appropriate models. Right? When I was 5 years old, I was deathly afraid of one of the Sesame Street Muppets. Not going to tell you which one because I don't want to prejudice you, right? But I want to let you know, friends, that I stand here today, I'm 49 years old, and I have gotten over that. I've made peace with the Muppets, right? But I still have daily terrors. See, our childhoods may have been plagued with vampires and ghoulish monsters underneath the bed, right? Things that seem largely ridiculous to our adult selves, but we don't let ourselves off the hook from fear as adulthood approaches. We never outgrow it. We don't discard fear as a traveling companion. We may leave behind creepy baby dolls and boogeymen in the closets, but we pick up other things, don't we? We pick up the fear of financial disaster. We pick up the fear of relational collapse. We pick up the fear of war. We pick up the fear of dying alone. We pick up the fear of worrisome spots on CAT scans. And as a result of this ever-maturing fear, we're always susceptible to a poverty of courage and to a wealth of fear. And see, fear in our lives, it's an equalizer. It doesn't matter the color of your skin, the amount of dollars in your bank account, anything about your history, right? We all are susceptible to that shaking. None of us can escape the debilitating effects that come from us in the form of circumstances and people. African-American theologian Howard Thurman talks about fear, and he said, everyone feels fear. But all fear is not created equal because not everyone experiences fear the same way. He talks about the fear that marginalized communities face, that it's of an entirely different matter, an entirely different variety than some of us. He says the helplessness that marginalized communities face is oppressive because it's not just their circumstances, but it feels as though the entire system is against them. And they begin to doubt not only their ability to overcome a circumstance, but to overcome at all. And what we have to remember when we talk about fear is that privilege is a fear insulator, right? See, if we talk about things that insulate us, if we talk about privilege, I have the privilege bundle. Many of you have the same privilege bundle. So I'm white, cisgender, heterosexual, Christian man. I've got it all. Like every advantage that I could have. It doesn't mean that I won't experience difficulty in this life. It just means I will never understand the difficulty of being a person of color, right? It doesn't mean that I will not be overwhelmed and have deep sorrow. It just means I will never have the experience of being a Muslim American in this nation right now. It doesn't mean that I am not going to be terrorized by things around me. It just means that I'll never know the terror of what it means to be a gay man living in this time and place. And why I tell you this is because we who are privileged have a responsibility in this time of shaking to be the peace givers and not the fear bringers. We are be responsible to leverage all of our privilege and all of our good fortune to stop the shaking for people who are in it right now. So the question is, we know who the fear bringers are, and we see them every day. And the challenge is stepping into that turbulence and being the peace givers, those who would speak for mercy and compassion and love and justice. Where does fear come from? It comes from the feeling that we can't control our circumstances, right? That's why I'm upset on the airplane, because I realize I'm powerless to change the present circumstances I find myself in. I was getting on the plane to Albuquerque that day, and I texted my host, and I said, getting ready to take off, see you soon. And she texted me back what she thought was encouragement. She texted me these words. You've done this before. She said, okay, be safe. I said, I'm just going to be sitting here. You tell that to the pilot and the weather. See, the pilot and the weather are outside of my control, and it's easy to think that my peace or my fear rests in those things outside of my control, but that's not really true, is it? I don't have control over some things, but I have control over my inner weather. This is what it means to be a person of faith, to be in the shaking and not be shaken by it. It means to say, I am going to control my inner weather by trusting in something beyond what I am feeling and seeing. See, there's a story in the Gospels, it's sort of a living parable about fear. I'll paraphrase it for you, but the disciples are invited by Jesus to take a boat ride. It's like a 3-hour tour. What could go wrong? And they get in the boat and everything's going great, and a storm comes, like the wind kicks up and the water begins to wash over the boat, and they begin to freak out. Even though they've been invited by Jesus, even though they've already seen him do miraculous things, they know his heart, they know his goodness, they know his character, and yet they allow what they see to overwhelm what they know. And I wonder in this time of shaking if you've allowed what you see to make you forget what you know. The disciples are freaking out in the middle of that chaos, and they look for Jesus to bail them out, and they find him in the back of the boat power napping, right? Now, Jesus is not sleeping because he doesn't care. He's sleeping because he knows who he is, and he has the storm right-sized. The pilot of my plane is not freaking out at the turbulence because he understands the turbulence. He has the turbulence right-sized. And for you and for me, the challenge we have in this time of great shaking is to right-size the threats and to cultivate a peace that transcends it, a peace that is bigger than the thing that shakes us. The question is not whether or not we're going to be placed in storms. The question is how much of those storms we're going to allow to be placed within us. Are we going to allow ourselves to be internally turbulent in turbulent days? You may recognize some of the symptoms of turbulence inside. Irritability, impatience, physical illness, eating emotionally, addictive behavior, the inability to be present to someone who loves you, an obsession with social media, a fixation on how bad it all is. Have you had any of those? I got them all. I got the bundle. See, the fear bringers in the world say you're unworthy, you're unloved, you're incapable, you're outmatched, you don't belong here. But the peace givers say you are strong and safe and loved, and you're welcome. So whether your turbulence today is delivered by a cruel family member, or a former friend, or a stranger on social media, or a predatory politician, or a brimstone preacher, or a system that is corrupt, remembering who you are and whose you are is critical to holding on to peace in times of turbulence. See, the disciples are freaking out, but Jesus is sleeping. God is not overwhelmed by the things that overwhelm you. God is not surprised by the adversity that you face. God is not taken aback by the danger. God is not intimidated by your struggles, and God is not pushed away by your doubts. See, when the shaking comes, the disciples ask a question of Jesus that we all ask of God right now. Don't you care about what's happening? Don't you care if we drown? I ask it every day. I try to hold on to this God, and I say, God, you really seem like you're asleep at the wheel right now. Jesus responds to the disciples, and he basically said, listen, friends, the menu on this trip is really limited. There's fear or there's faith. Which would you like? This is the option that we have for us today. Because what that story tells us, they actually get to the other side, and after Jesus stills the wind and the waves, they say, we're in awe and wonder that this man can do this. And what I want you to realize is there are storms that you have traveled through to get here today, and you're looking back and you can say, I can't believe I made it through, right? You can look back retrospectively and see what God was doing. You can see the goodness in it, right? You can see what it was forming in you, can't you? So what we have to do is trust that one day, this turbulent spot on which we stand, we will look back and we will realize that we are stronger because we've come through it, and we know more about the character of God than we did before. Do not fear is one of the most common commands in the Bible, and it's the one we obey the least, right? It's the continuous golden tether running through the scriptures. The assurance that faith is the antidote to all that terrifies us. It is the steady declaration that if God is indeed God, that we're safe and we're loved and all will be well. And I want you to realize that everyone around you, the people you share the grocery store line with, the people you pass in traffic, the people you sit next to at work, the people in your kitchen, they're all experiencing storms right now. They're all fighting to find peace and to push back fear. And your job is to be a reminder of why they should choose peace. I told you about my daughter, Selah. She gets frantic in the storms. That was 2 years ago. But now she's 8. And it's different now. Because one day when she was 6 and the storm came and she started freaking out, I picked her up and I went out onto the porch and I sat her down and I talked about the storm and I explained to her what was happening. And as I talked to her about it, her heart rate slowed and her body stopped shaking and she began to breathe normally. And now when the storm comes, wherever she is, she runs down and she says, Dad, let's go out and watch the storm together. Because I did 2 things for my daughter. I let her know the reality of the shaking. I reminded her and I right-sized that storm for her. But I also let her know that I would be present with her in the storm. This is the promise that we have today. The things that shake us are not bigger than the one who holds us. It's difficult to believe, friends, but I hope that you'll claim this today. We have a job to do in this time of great shaking, and part of it means that we become the turbulence. We become the turbulence to the fear-bringers. We become the turbulence to those who would deny people's humanity. We become the turbulence to those who would discriminate against people based on their race, or their gender identity, or sexual orientation, or nation of origin, or language. We become the turbulence with our hands, with our voices, with our resources, with our lives, with our votes. We become the shaking so that others can experience stillness. My prayer for you is that you may have your fears right-sized, that in this world you may be a peace giver and not a fear bringer, that you may find rest in your storms, that you will not allow the turbulence around you to create a turbulence within you. And may you realize that all the things you fear and all that pushes against you and all that shakes you, in the eyes of God, is just a little chop. Peace, friends. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you, John. That's awesome. Thank you. John, thank you so much Thank you for that reminder that all of us really needed to hear in this moment. We are living through turbulent times, but that doesn't mean that we have to be experiencing turbulence within us. And as you were speaking, I was thinking of that metaphor of the hurricane, that even though there's so much swirling all around us, within us is this eye of the storm, this place of calmness and peace, that kingdom of heaven that is within us that we can always find despite what's happening around us. So thank you, John, for moving us from fear to faith.